This is Beowulf. So this myth starts off with Hrothgar making a mead hall, which is a giant building that's made for feast, partying, gatherings. Mainly here, it's partying. So Hrothgar starts partying like every night, and then this monster named Grendel is disturbed by the sound of the parties, and he's like, "There's only one solution to this problem," and so he goes to the mead hall and starts killing them. Grendel keeps arriving nightly and killing more and more people. That is until Beowulf is sent to Denmark. So Beowulf and Hrothgar and other people party, and he's like, "Oh, this Grendel guy, he doesn't wear armor. I won't either." And someone else there was like, "Oh, didn't you lose to this one guy in a swimming race? Like, you can't defeat Grendel with no armor." And then Beowulf starts ranting and he's just like he makes a speech and then everyone's like, "Hell yeah, dude, you got this. We believe in you." And then so they party some more, they wait until nightfall. Beowulf pretends that he's sleeping and like doesn't notice Grendel's there. Grendel ends up killing one of the warriors and then Grendel and Beowulf start fighting. They're fighting, fighting, fighting. Beowulf just rips off Grendel's arm and then Grendel runs away. Beowulf's like, "Oh yeah, let's party some more." He hangs up the arm and everyone starts partying again. Shortly after, the night after, uh, after they're partying some more, Grendel's mother like runs to the mead hall looking for his son for revenge, and Grendel ends up killing one of Hrothgar's advisors, grabs the arm, and then runs back to her lair. Beowulf's like, "Oh, let's follow her to this wherever she went." Beowulf then follows her to her lair, which is in like a lake. And so Beowulf ends up jumping in the lake with all his armor on, taking him multiple hours to reach, which is surprising. And then Grendel's mother ends up dragging Beowulf into her lair, and Beowulf and Grendel's mother are fighting. Beowulf kind of noticed that she's stronger, swinging his sword, no damage, breaks the sword, and then mother's lair is just full of treasure and stuff, and then Beowulf finds this heirloom sword and ends up swinging the sword at Grendel's mother, kills her in one swing, and then he finds Grendel, takes off his head, and then the sword just melts in his hand, only having the hilt left. And then Beowulf ends up swimming back to the surface to show everybody that he's victorious, showing off his head and stuff. And then they all go back to the mead hall, and then they hang Grendel's head, and then party some more, of course. Then after partying, Beowulf ends up returning to Geatland, then returns to his king Hygelac to tell him his victory on his journey. Beowulf ends up giving the king all of the treasures rewards he got for defeating Grendel and them. And then shortly after, a few days, Higelac and his son died in the battle, and everyone's like, "Oh no, who's gonna be our king now?" And then Beowulf was actually ended up uh, offered the throne and became King Beowulf. After king for 50 years, a runaway slave found a dragon guarding his treasure, and the slave ended up taking one of the dragon's stone goblets, hoping the dragon wouldn't notice. Shortly after, of course, the dragon noticed. He's like, "Hey, you stole my favorite treasure," and ends up just burning the village, setting it on fire, setting Beowulf's royal hall on fire. And then Beowulf's like, "Finally, a fight. I've been waiting for this." So Beowulf and his army go to the dragon's barrow. Beowulf says he'll take on the dragon himself, despite him being old and haven't had an, even though he hasn't had a fight after 50 years or so. So Beowulf ends up trying to fight the dragon. Literally one swing, sword breaks, and he's like, "Uh-oh." And the dragon's pissed off at him. The dragon ends up spitting flames at Beowulf, And then Wiglaf says that they must help Beowulf in this battle. All the warriors, the army that Beowulf showed up with, end up leaving, but Wiglaf stays. Then, after the army flees, the dragon ends up biting Beowulf's neck, and he's just like hurt on the ground. And then Wiglaf ends up finding a weak spot in the dragon. Beowulf quickly stands up and then ends up stabbing the dragon in the weak spot using a war knife. Then the dragon is obviously slain by Beowulf, but Beowulf being injured by the bite and the flames, they end up finding out that the dragon's poison is going through him, killing him faster, knocking him over. And then Beowulf's like, Wiglaf, can you show me what I got in my rewards for this journey? Wiglaf ends up running into the dragon's barrel, grabbing just as much gold treasure as he can to show Beowulf, and then Beowulf ends up dying from the poison. Wiglaf finds the army and just starts ranting like, you guys should have been there, you guys should have helped, but Beowulf is victorious. And then, of course, people thought that Beowulf should be buried with his treasure, so they set him on a pyre, which is like a big lump of stuff that you can set on fire, and then they burned it with Beowulf on top and then buried him with the treasure. That was it for the myth part, but now into the characteristics of heroism and utopia. Heroism that I've seen in this myth is Beowulf's bravery and strength, his loyalty and duty by aiding King Hrothgar, but not for his own personal gain, but for his honor repaying debts, for his kinship. Beowulf mainly seeks glory, so he wants reputation, and then in Beowulf's final battle, he sacrifices himself, showing him like, oh, I'm willing to die for these people, whatever. And then there's some utopias that I found that the hero or the mead hall was seen as kind of like a mini utopia, like where they just party. There's like nothing wrong except for Grendel showing up. Um, and then there's cycles of conflict as peace is temporary, and then revenge and death is always inevitable. And then I also saw mortality and fate, which is an inevitable path to death and decay, which makes it impossible for utopia as Beowulf's reign is prosperous. And then it ends in destruction after the dragon comes in. It lights everything on fire, burning everything. Some significant and intriguing elements I found is some hero ideals, strength, loyalty, and courage that all define Beowulf's character. And then Beowulf searching for glory and fame, so his name is talked about after death. Social and cultural themes that I found um, is the mead hall was a symbol of community and joy. Kinship and loyalty showing bonds of like everyone and like everyone working together, I guess. Feuds and revenge showing the inevitability of conflict undermining any lasting peace. And then some mythic stuff, such as like monsters such as Grendel and like his mother and the dragon being seen as metaphors, as Grendel portrays more of like a chaos and rage. Grendel's mother being vengeance, and then the dragon seen as greed and mortality. I've also seen fate, the inevitability of death and destiny, setting the tone in this myth. Some intriguing contradictions I found. It was some the heroism versus mortality, as Beowulf achieves greatness, but his death shows the limits of human power. Community versus isolation, which is the mead hall thrives on fellowship while monsters lurk in solitude. I also saw peace and violence, even in moments of celebration or parties, the threat of chaos lurks.